What is the Bebras challenge? Like, how would you describe what it is to somebody?
The Bebras challenge is basically 45 minutes of fun puzzles, logical thinking things, algorithms, a little bit of data structures, and the tasks are set up from easy to hard so that it's fun for everybody. So if you start with it, you're not expected to finish. If you finish, it's great. But if you don't, you still have had a good time solving the task that you were working on. Once you hear the explanation of the solution, you are going to understand it. And you're going to be like, oh man, I wish I would have come up with that. That's so nice and simple. Oh, that is so cool. What a great way to do it. And for me, a good task doesn't have to be overly hard. A good task is something that you can think about. You should be able to come to a solution by yourself. And the only thing limiting you during the challenge was that there was a 45-minute time limit. Oh boy, I wanted to have another 45 minutes. I would have solved them all. One of my test subjects is my mother. And my mother is a retired 75-year-old French teacher. And she likes to work on the puzzles. She thinks about them. And she comes up with solutions. She managed to solve them all. And sometimes I'm surprised. I'm like, Mom, how did you solve this? She's like, well, I just wrote out every possible solution. I'm like, that's 15 pages. She's like, no, it's actually 20 pages. and I was like, well, how did you do that? She's like, well, I'm retired. I have a little bit more time than you do. And then, so she comes up with the correct answer. And then I tell her, well, there's actually a smarter way of doing it. And that's this and that. And then she's like, oh, that's clever. And then she realizes that. And then the next year, I give her a similar task. And then she applies this methodology that I have taught her without her realizing that I was teaching her something.
So what's an example of like an easy challenge that a kid might work on?
So here is a non-visual task. There is an inspector in a city, and the city has a museum. And in that museum, they have a diamond. It's called the blue diamond. And the reason they call it the blue diamond is because it's blue. During the day, 2,000 people have gone to the museum to look at the diamond. And at the end of the day, as they close the museum, the janitor closes everything, sweeps the floor, and he's like, oh, that's weird. The blue diamond is green. And so someone during the day has taken the blue diamond and replaced it by a green diamond. So they call the inspector, and the inspector comes to the museum, and he says, well, who could have stolen it? And the museum says, well, we had 2,000 people that came through the museum today. We know exactly in what order they have come through the museum. Now, we scanned their tickets, so we know exactly in which order they came through the museum. And so the inspector is going to go to these 2,000 people, and he will ask them, when you looked at the diamond, what color was it? Now, was it blue or green? And now the question is, how many people does the inspector have to interview in order to guarantee that he knows for certain who is the thief? To make it a little easier and to make sure that there's no off by one errors, because this is not about how good you are at math. It's multiple choice. And so the answers are A, you have to speak to all 2,000 people. B, you have to speak to at least half of them. But if you're not lucky, maybe, 1,500. Answer 3 is you have to speak to at least 100 people. Answer 4 is, well, don't know exactly how many, but definitely less than 20 if you do it in a smart way. So you understand the problem, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's, you and me, play a little game. The game is called Guess a Number. I'm going to think of a number between 0 and 2,000. See how clever I chose these boundaries to match up with how many people went to the museum?
Yep.
I'm going to have a number, and you have to guess it. And you can guess a number, and I will say higher or lower, or hey, you're correct. Right? So what would your first guess be?
1,000.
Exactly. You would guess in the middle. Because, if that's the number, then, gee, you're lucky. But obviously, I'm just cheating you because I will just try to make this game last. So I'm going to say lower. What would you guess?
So 500.
500. Lower.
250.
Lower.
125.
And you see where I'm going?
Yeah.
You keep halving how many possibilities there are. So when there's 125 and I say higher, the number has to be between 126 and 249. Every time You ask me a question. If you ask the right question, you can discard half the numbers. And boy, does it go down fast that way. And if you were asking less smart questions, if you would ask one and I would say higher, and then you'd say two, higher, three, higher. Do you see where I'm going? 2,000 questions. But the way you did it, the clever way, you start halving the thing. And we call that a binary search. It's just a computational thinking concept. It's an algorithm.
Right, but kids don't know that they're actually engaging in that when solving the problem.
Right. At some point, the diamond changed from green to blue, or from blue to green. And that point is basically the number that we're aiming for. If someone says blue, they mean higher. And if someone says green as answer, they mean lower.
Right.
It's the exact same problem, just, in a more accessible way, a bit more clever maybe, but it's a fun little thing. And we tell this to the kids, and most kids actually figure this out. But then when you talk about it and you give them this explanation, and they're like, oh, that's pretty clever actually. And then once they start really thinking about it, because sometimes they say 100 guesses, even though they figured this out, then they start thinking about it, how fast binary numbers go up when you keep doubling everything.
Right.
And because we don't really we don't care if the answer is 11 or 12, or maybe even 13 if you're off by one. We don't care about that. That's why, the correct answer is definitely less than 20, so that, in your mind, you don't have to calculate everything. You just think about it a little bit.